So I'll tell you a little bit about our office. So it's a small firm. It's 20 designers, and we have two offices, one in Manhattan and the other in East Hampton. It was started in 1965 in Manhattan, and it was started by, that's our East Hampton office, where we designed and built and moved in 2016. But if I'm going to talk about the history of our office, there's no way I could skip the founder, Harry Bates, who is a legend, as my kids would say, on many fronts, as a gentleman, as a person, and as a designer. And so he started the firm in 1965, and he attended North Carolina State, and interestingly enough, he was in the first graduating class in 1952. He worked for Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill under Gordon Bunshaft, where he was involved with some iconic projects, such as the Pepsi-Cola building, Union Carbide building, and Bunshaft's personal residence in East Hampton. So I met Harry Bates in 1997, and it was an unlikely pairing. I was between undergrad, just left Meyer's office, and was headed to the GSD, and by chance we met, and he was 69 at the time, I was 25, and it was just a great relationship, and little did I know he'd become a good friend and a mentor and a great partner. So I thought it would be appropriate to look at some of his early work because it's made an impression on our firm. I think it has roots in the work that we do today, and primarily his career started on Fire Island, which is a barrier island about 50 miles east of New York City. And you can define it, if anyone has been there, they can see it's windswept pines and sandy dunes and beach. And so being in such a remote location, it was really difficult for labor and materials. And Harry was extremely creative and would tell me he would just visit the local lumber yards and see what was readily available. And he was really able to orchestrate some beautiful homes based on the limited supplies and create these serene experiences. Having no extraneous details and often lining all the interiors and exteriors. And back when he was building these homes in the 60s, it was primarily cypress and redwood. So a lot of these homes that were built on Fire Island is pretty much a sandbar, so it was all in a flood zone, so they became these objects in the landscape. But really, the simplicity and the powerful forms they really made them iconic, and they're still there on Fire Island, and there's a tour every year of his work. He and even looking at this image, I mean, it looks like it could be from today, and this is in the 60s. And he was a very humble person. I loved how he would frame things, and he would say that the decoration is outside, and it's through the windows, it's the landscape. And this is might not make code today, but I think you get the point. The work I'm presenting, which is, for me, it has an impact on me, is 60 years after some of that work. But you'll see that our focus is on developing a narrative, which is important, and it's expressed through our craft. Each project we strive to uniquely address the occupants and make it a meaningful experience. So included in that is finding that balance of livability and a strong design concept. So in this approach, we're looking for our work to have a deeper meaning to our occupants and create lasting memories for them. So I'll run through some projects. They're residential. So first project, this is in Watermill, New York. It's for a young family of 5, 2013. And interestingly enough, this project came with some covenants and restrictions on 2 structures. These are Andrew Geller, who's an architect, and they were, I think this was 1963, these 2 homes were designed and built. And also included on the property that they purchased was covenants on a garden, which consisted of some sculptural yews and irises. The property is located on a bay, Mecox Bay, and then on a canal that works its way into the property. The property had a little bit of topography down to the water, but this is what would define that area, that you would see the wetlands and these elevated walkways, which really is part of the characteristic of the place. But interestingly enough, the elevated walkway was a device that Geller used a lot, whether it was connecting various structures or to the landscape. So a little bit about the property and taking in all the influences. You have the yews, the topiaries and the irises, the Geller structures, which we were tasked to refurbish. In the upper right, this is the site, and you can see all the circuitous yews, and tucked in there was a tennis court that they had to keep. And the wetlands, and then they asked us to have a lawn for the children to play with, but then we had to design a house. There's a lot going on there. So how are we going to approach this? So we looked at these different zones, and where towards the street there was this restricted garden. The center area is the lawn, and then it slopes down to the wetlands. And so we have this form that begins to kind of wind its way through the site. And we thought about that, going back to the Geller structures as this elevated walkway. How can we have this idea of an elevated walkway weave all these components together, but manifest as an expression in the architecture? And so this is the beginnings of the project, where we still build a lot of physical models in our office. I don't know how many people still do that, but for each project it could be 20, 30 models. This is probably the final model that we did. But you can see that we started with this elevated walkway originating at one of the Geller structures and working its way and sort of growing into the house. And one of the goals, and a lot of it we were talking about, was to just, how do we design this house as not to make the Geller structures look insignificant? And one was that the house would not be taller than those existing structures. And fortunately, we were able to do that because the ground was sloping away towards the wetland. So it is a 2-story structure, but from the approach, it really appears as 1 story. And the house is tapering. So starting from the Geller structures, as it rises towards its termination, it's increasing in height. So just from the floor plan, I'm getting there. So having this elevated walkway, connecting, there's a pool area, an outdoor area. There's some family spaces in here, kitchen, living, dining, and ending up at the living room with a deck that's overlooking the wetlands. And then the plan to the right, this is the space that was below. It's like a pedestal. That are some support spaces for the house. And so this is part of construction. As we're refurbishing the Geller structure, we decided to relocate it in the garden to make some space, but it also the garden created its own outdoor room. Not easy getting it in there. They actually craned that building into place, which was quite interesting. And so here, this is the final product, where this is the Geller structure in the foreground, and you can see our building in the background and this relationship between the two of them. And here's this elevated walkway that we designed, and purposefully we have this pattern of these narrow and wide boards, and also sort of this weaving of these intersections as it changes the route through the property. And as I get into the design of it, you'll see why we have this pattern of the narrow and wide boards. And here's a good image that shows the house as it's ascending in height. And so each one of these boards actually are tapering and getting wider. There's the pool. The pool's, we elevated the pool, and it really becomes a water feature than just a swimming pool. And one of the smaller Geller structure becomes a pool house. This is the detail of the weaving of the boards as you change direction. And then as you're sort of following the paths into the house, these are some of the outdoor spaces. And then here was the idea, as we get into the structure, where the structures, the roof is reflecting the ground plane, and we have that alternating pattern of the wide and narrow boards, where we began to drop out boards to organize some of the utilities, such as speakers and lights and vents. Looking back, that lower level that I spoke about, there's a carport below, but we kept the narrow boards, dropped out the wider boards to have this dappled light. And then into the house, this is into the finished space. You'll see that pattern or the cadence and rhythm of the floor continues on the inside into the ceiling, creating these baffle light fixtures, and wrapping them down into the backsplash of the kitchen, continuing that architectural language into some of the smaller spaces, such as a powder room. And this is a good image that shows to the right where that vocabulary of the ceiling and ground plane of the elevated walkway continues out through an exterior space and then back into an interior space beyond. And then taking some opportunities where in the structure where we begin to turn into these transitions. This is the master bathroom and one of the knuckles where we open up to the sky, and we're merging an outdoor shower and indoor shower. And the bathroom just continuously wrapped in this material. I feel like this was some of the things that Harry was doing, is using this singular material for all the different surfaces. All the way to the termination, where we sort of wrap up this elevated walkway, becomes the chimney, but it's also letting light into the living room, and then looking back and seeing the relationship of the house to these Geller structures. And then this is the pedestal, as I was describing earlier, and the pedestals, this is quite old, but it's a material now that they use in the architecture industry. This was called skate light, and it was used for skateboard ramps, and it's phenolic resin that's pretty indestructible. So we were able to use that material, and thinking about the idea and this narrative of weaving together the site, we thought about, all right, let's weave these panels onto the house. This is actually a detail where we had some steel panels that were woven onto the fireplace. But we designed these fasteners where we had them CNC milled. It was a screw with a cap, and then it was wired on. The contractor loved us for that. And then this is the this is the project down from the wetlands and sitting on that base. Okay, so this next project is located in a town, Amagansett, New York. I'm gonna come clean, this is my own house. So anyone that's designed their own house, you know, there's some challenges associated with that, but I think it was pretty successful. We're happy living there. But the appeal of it, having 3 young children, so again, another family of 5, wanted to be in the town. The kids could walk to school, they could walk to the library, but there was some, anyone that knows the eastern end of Long Island can get pretty busy and noisy. So of course that came up as a concern from my wife, that we're just gonna hear everyone all the time. So this is a pretty good diagram. There's the main street of the village, and we're right there. Not too far from the ocean, quick bike ride. So thinking about it, you know, was, all right, what's the jumping off point? Dealing with the acoustics, and you know, it's not something that I was really experienced in, whether it's my professional or academic experience, but some of the basics is mass and thinking about a series of parallel walls that could create this acoustical shadow from the main street where the noise is coming from. And it started as an interesting diagram, and then sectionally, also thinking about that and looking at these series of walls, and not only in plan, but in section, and sort of this ascending height, and sort of there's this human scale as you approach it. And so the way that the house worked was you sort of come in, you can slip between them. The main entrance is the only area that punctuates all the way through the structure, but there was this circulation that ran through these series of parallel walls. There's 2 bedrooms on the first floor, sort of bookending the house, and then in the center is the kitchen, living, dining, and to the right is the second floor. That's where the kids live, and I don't think I've ever been upstairs. You can't go there. So here's another one of our models, and again, it's a way that we work, but it's a good way of showing a series of parallel walls. And what we did use was, you probably know, it's called the insulated concrete forms. It's the first time that I used it. It was an interesting structure. It's a series of these units, these blocks that have insulation, but the insulation is used as the formwork to cast the concrete. So they stack them together, tie it all together with rebar, and you pour the wall. And for our area, it worked really well. Being in a hurricane zone, we had the freezing winters, and acoustically it worked great. So this is the house in its finished product, and you can see the sort of layering and stepping. And the one area has a clear shot through the house from the entrance into the backyard, the garden, illustrating those walls and sort of descending and ascending height on the approach. Having these views through the parallel walls is a nice sort of way of living, kind of connecting you to the landscape. But a large part of the house that you may notice are these cliffs, and this became this study where we really wanted these wider barn boards. And you saw the picture and the introduction of the slide of the silo that had the wide boards, and they would strap them together like the water towers. And you know, the reason the wide boards never worked on some of our old projects is because when they were screwed and nailed into place and they go through the freeze thaw and the humidity, they'd expand the boards, but the fasteners stayed in place and they'd split the boards, and you know, season after season it didn't last. So instead of this strapping idea, we came up with this tension clip idea that allows the boards to move, to expand and contract. So there's actually no fasteners into the wood on the house. And just as that screw that you saw, we have a 3D printer. We do a lot of mock-ups, designing a lot of fasteners and hardware. This is just some of the different types that we were looking at. And as soon as we found something that works, we got excited and we said, what else can it be? And so there's a robe hook or bathing suit hook, door handles, looking at some lighting details with it, hanging these baffles. These are some paneling with some inset mirrors, some mirrors. Starting to get a little braver where I'm holding up some stone panels in the shower with them. I did have a ledge on the bottom for that, though. I had to. And then again, you know, being in this community, the beach community, it's a nice experience to have the outdoor shower. So this is off the master bedroom. And here's the main living space. It's just, and that's really it. It's not a very big house. There's no formal living, no formal dining. But in the design of the house, we were really questioning ourselves, you know, making decisions, you know, not solely based visually, but acoustical decisions. And we hired an acoustical consultant to advise. And, you know, as we got into it, he was always telling us or trying to get us to make it this acoustically correct space. And as we started thinking about it, I said, I don't know if that's really what I'm looking for, and it sort of dawned on me that I was looking more for sort of a variety of experiences, like the scale of rooms or, you know, the lighting levels of rooms to appeal to different emotions. And so that really became our goal, was how to vary the space. And so you can see that there's this wall, this paneled wall, which plays a big part of this room. And what we're looking through on the top and bottom are these large sliding glass door panels, which just, you know, the sound echoes off of. And so we're thinking, all right, how do we be able to tune this space? And I'll get to some details of that. So this is the main space. You can see these view corridors through. This is the kitchen, pretty simple. You know, that being careful of the apertures towards the street and really just using a skylight to let light in. And so this is the back wall of the main living space. And there's a series, the clips are hinges where you can move the panels and they oscillate, and you can actually tune the space, laying them all flat, the sound comes back at you, opening them up, there's some felt behind it, which is absorbing the sound, but by letting it be random, not only is it a nice pattern, but it also reflects the space, the sound in the space, and you can enjoy where you are. And this is a study, a den, and it's a good picture that shows these walls, how they slip inside the house and move outside, and then into sort of these more live spaces where, you know, that one sort of kitchen, living, dining can be more of a sort of tuned down, the deader space. But this space where we have this big glass wall and these metal walls, and thinking about this stair and how can we can have a little bit of fun with it. And so we thought about the treads and risers a little, and thinking about instruments. And what we did was we design the thickness of the treads. So the treads in the basement were thicker, and as you came up, they tapered and they got thinner. And so you subconsciously, as you're going up, your footfalls would have a different pitch or tone. And so as you're going up, the sound changes. And, you know, it's funny to see, you know, some people recognize it, some people don't, but they get this, you know, feeling of ascending and descending. This is the house from the garden side, and that's it in its entirety. So, okay, so this is another project. This is in Amagansett. This is for another young family of 5 in Amagansett. And Amagansett an interesting town, a little hamlet, you'd call it. You have the ocean. You have where the main street is, there's the bay with all the wetlands, and there's this unique little area over here that is a pasture. And it's just uncharacteristic, but it was very appealing to our clients, and they fell in love with the landscape and said, we really want you to embody that in the architecture, which I said, okay, well, let's take a look at that. And looking into the history of it, it was actually pretty fascinating, and learning how that pasture came to be, where it was the Native Americans that they would do controlled burns in this area. They burned down all the trees, they'd let the grasses come up, and then they would become hunting grounds. And then eventually, when the settlers came, they used that as a pasture for their livestock. And then as time went by, they became these farms, for these riding academies, and then, the Hamptons being the Hamptons, there's Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe moved in there. But it still has that character that made it so beautiful over 100 years ago. And we started looking into how these pastures worked, and it was very interesting, where you'd have the corral or barn, and there would be these series of these defining boundaries, whether they were walls or fences, and each of the pastures would be in these zones, and they would have the livestock in one, and as that was depleted, they'd move them to the next pasture, and then when that would go, they'd move to the next pasture, which would give time for the first ones to regenerate, this sort of cyclical, the cyclical process, and that's how they ran them. And so we looked at that, and we thought, all right, here are some of the influences of the property. This is the property line over here, and we had a fairly busy road over here. This was less busy, the driveway. But opening up to the back, we had views of the pasture, the sunset. And so thinking about, not architecturally, but more of the landscape, where we had this zone of the highest area from the road noise would be, whether it's plants or topography, and then starting to drop, and then into sort of where the entry would be, and then the lowest as it was facing towards the view. And so in the house, in the layout of the site, we stuck to that diagram, having the highest from the road. We did, as you can see here, bring up the topography. We had some retaining walls, another high zone here into a low zone where the approach was to sort of give some glimpses of the house, and then into the lowest, which became the lawn out to the pasture. The house was broken up into 3 zones, where we have a family wing, we have the main kitchen, living, dining, and then this is a sort of service with some guest space above. And between each of these volumes, we had these interstitial spaces of a family room and the entry. And the second floor was where some of the bedrooms were. So again, another study model, looking at some of those agricultural building forms. It was exciting for us because of having these big uninterrupted space with no collar ties, because what the structure of those roofs was the floor plate, and so that was what was holding it together. So you have these big spans with no steel in them. And then here is the finished product, and we did some research on grasses. This was exciting to learn about the different types, the native grasses, the scale that they grow, the colors, the seasons when they come to life. And really the idea was to have the grasses change during different times of the year. So, one would step back and the other one would come into bloom. And in doing that, we also got excited about the fact of maybe that the grasses that reflect the pasture can be used architecturally. And so we said, that's thatching, and so we proposed to the clients to do some thatching and on the house, and they said, that's great, who's going to do it? And we couldn't find anyone. So we came up with this idea of constructing these bays. And the reason why is because we found a place in England that would sell panels, that was this wide and that was it. And so we said, all right, we could probably work with that. And so we have these cedar bays where then the panels would clip in, and it was all designed. We had everything figured out. And then guess what? We found someone who could do thatching. And so we showed him the design, and we said, well, don't worry about those bays. We were just trying to figure it out. And he said, no, I like that. He's like, I actually, I've never done something like this before. I think it's interesting. And we kind of liked that because we knew we'd be pulling that language inside the house, and it also helped us to sort of get around some circumstances. And we were learning about how do you terminate them, and having these stainless steel bars. But the bay, it would save us. Here's an intake for the mechanical system in the thatch, and sort of fits right in there. And then here's the house from the entry side as you are approaching it, and you can see through the house the grasses being able to nestle it into the landscape. And then this picture shows the different types of grasses. This is a sand cast terracotta tile that we used, and a cedar shingle. It is a different type of grass. This isn't that highest zone. And then we have these series of apertures that were letting light into some various areas as a light well and another outdoor shower. And then here's the thatch as it begins to kind of work its way into the house, and it's beautiful. It picks up the light unbelievably, and the sound and the feel and the smell of it is really something special. And then the main space of the house, we use that same terracotta tile. Functionally, we looked at it a little bit different in terms of it's a big space. There's glass on both sides, and we cut the tiles down into much smaller pieces, opened a gap, and have some acoustical material behind it to help be a sink for that room. Into the living room. And having this large bench that goes along the kitchen, living, dining, that's facing out towards the pasture, but it kind of, as you're sitting there, puts you at eye level with the grasses. And it's leading you into this family room that's beyond. This was this interstitial space between the two volumes, where it's sunk in, and you have the siding that rolls right into the house. Kitchen, using that same material for the floors, the ceilings, the cabinetry. Working with the stone, trying some details of working on some of the exhausts for the cooking. And there's that bay system that's holding up the stair that evokes the outside of those vertical cedar boards. Looking back into the house from the stairway. This was unique. It was a sleeping porch that we designed, a screened sleeping porch on the second floor for the kids, and it was pretty good timing because as we were completing the houses when COVID was full swing, so they were the only kids in town that could have sleepovers because they were outside. And then into the primary area where we again are using that language of these vertical boards and the bays in a vanity. This is transparent, which there's the outdoor shower in that aperture of the roof. And then here's that uninterrupted space for the primary looking out over the pasture. There's the house with the covered porch. House looking back at the structures. And then there's the sleeping porch. Okay, so this is a project located in Sag Harbor, New York. It's a recent project. Again, dealing with water, quite a bit of it. They're located in a cove, and the cove, the property itself is on this peninsula. So we did a little research to just see the history of the peninsula. And we found out the peninsula was never there. And it was made by dredging and just dumping excavation there. And as you can imagine, guess what happens? And that was the existing structure that was there. That, from what I was told, the house was frequently like that and wet. But really, the issue was okay. Some of the basics, you got to elevate the house, but the other part is, where do you put the water from the roof? Like, if you dig down 12 inches, you're in groundwater. So we went back. We looked at this is the finished product, but really revegetating this whole area. It used to be all beach, really all along here, and we got rid of that, replanted, and so we came up with the house as a structure. There's this sort of folded roof plane, and there's a series of apertures in the roof, and as I'll get in, I'll explain that a little bit more to you, the functionality of that. But I think this is a good image that shows the water relationship on both sides. Whoops, I'm sorry. And so the idea of the house was we'd have these 5 pavilions that were under this united roof, and it was pretty simple. Sorry, another family of 5, and they had the bedrooms, kitchen, and a family room, and the spaces between those volumes were the interstitial spaces, were these public spaces like the dining and living. But this diagram really shows how the clients and us wanted to live in the house in the summer season, that these doors would just completely open up. And so you'd be living under one big roof, but inside each one of these pavilions would be this contained room, and it had its own set of materials that were different than some of these interstitial spaces. But in the wintertime, you can close the doors, and it unites it to become a larger space. And so, here we are dealing with the water again. The first thing we did was lifted the house, and we put the house on pilings because it was just incredibly unstable, that soil. It was pretty interesting. And so what we thought about was we had this roof, as you saw from the aerial view, that was shaped, and we would direct the water into these drainage light wells. And we're thinking about, okay, similar to the other project, we can store them, but this one here is where the groundwater was up here, but we'd be storing the water all the way up into this level of the ground level. But then celebrating them in each one of these drainage wells into almost like a terrarium, an outdoor sculpture. And the other part of this that I can explain as we get into it is getting the mechanicals away from the ground. And by shaping this roof, we were able to accomplish some space for that. So here's the house with the water on both sides. Here are those individual, so the 5 pavilions, and each one of the pavilions has one of the light wells. This one's got a nice cypress that's growing out of it. There's the roof, the shape of the roof that's directing the water into it. And then, as the water through you can see the process coming off the roof, having these downspouts or gutters, and they create these patina, the stain, this pattern that's on the copper, some of the trees growing in there. Here's the plan, a little bit more detailed, with the bedrooms and each one of these drainage light wells and how they're landscaped, the dining and the living room with this covered deck, the kitchen, pantry, and the family room, and then we had some outdoor covered space and a pool and small pool pavilion. The model of the house and the idea of this roof was, again, as a mechanical space, and we had 2 mechanical spaces, one on either side of the house, where the main equipment would be, and then as the duct runs continued through the house, they would taper, and they'd get smaller and smaller, and that reflected in the roof shape. There's the house, and showing it in the summertime where it's activated when those doors are open, and you can really get this connection to both bodies of water. This is from the approach side. We sort of diminished the glass a bit because the car is coming in, but still we're able to open up certain vignettes. This is a good picture that shows the exterior material coming inside the house. This is the outdoor space. That's the covered outdoor space with the fireplace. And elevating the house, connecting to the landscape. We had some areas of these step planters. The decking, we used this pattern. And it was really just opening it up quite a bit so that the water could flow through in the event when it does flood. It can come through the decking. Some of the materials that continue inside and outside as they, are patinaing at different rates, but that also tells the story a little bit. And some of the more cozy living spaces with the furniture. And in this particular project, our clients, they really embraced the process, and they were very excited about it. And they told us that they used to have a table in their old house that people would come and carve their name in it. And they said, can you design us a table for that? And so being that there's so much copper, we used the copper plate. And there's a series of tiles that inlay in the top of the table, and those are sort of finger pulls, so you can pull out and change out tiles. But we had an engraving set made, and people would come and they'd put their name in, and they'd pound it into the leather, and so they'd have this record of all the people that came and stayed at the house. So this is the main space, just living on the water. This is one of those drainage wells. If you can see here, there's actually water in this one. But having these aquatic plants and lighting it up at night and getting this sort of rippling effect on the water is quite beautiful. Here's an image between two of the bedroom pavilions, and you can see there's a clear distinction between the materials on the inside of those bedrooms, and then where there's the connections of the exterior material that runs through. And those are large sliding glass doors that can give privacy to each of them into one of the bedrooms where we designed all the furniture. And one of the drainage wells, we had an outdoor shower in there. And this is the family room. Kitchen, pretty simple. Some of the lighting details, hanging some of the shelves or embedding some lights in these hanging system. And so there's one of the cypress in the wells, but for the fastening system, we used a bronze screw, and the idea was to really patina the wood to sort of get a mottled effect, whereas it begins to kind of create these stains around each of the fasteners. And the idea was to kind of merge it with the landscape and have these different patterns and textures as it began to gray. And there's the house from Waterside at dusk. So, you want me to ask anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Could you make some comments about your attitude towards the difference between physical models versus digital models, how that affects your work in the office, and how clients receive the models?
Yeah. So modeling, physical models versus digital models in our process. We use a lot of physical models in the beginning, and try not to make them so precious, and really just chipboard, whatever it is. And it's just really, it's quick studies of visualization. For me personally, and I think a lot of the people in our office, they love that it's sort of, you're dealing with the scale, you're dealing with the form, you're dealing with the volume, jumping back and forth between that and sketching. And then, you know, I have a difficult time doing that digitally at that early stage. And we do a lot of digital modeling and rendering, but it's at a later stage where we're incorporating materials and textures and lighting and shadow. So I think they both play a role in our office, and the technology is changing. It's becoming much quicker to do that, but for me, I can't replace it, and our office feels that same way. And I also think that the clients, when we meet with them and they take the model, and it's not just a static image, and I know you can do walkthroughs, but they take the model and they look in it and they spin it around, and they feel like this sense of control and understanding and absorbing, like, what's the relationship of the volume of the structure to the property and to the topography, and seeing it all together at once. So I don't know if that explains. Yes?
What was the material on that first house that was on the lower level? You said something about a skateboard ramp or something?
Yes. So it's evolved into a material that you probably know now called Richlite. Richlite? I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And they use it as a countertop material. It's a paper in a resin. And it was incredibly cheap. I think at the time, because it was for the skateboard industry, it was like $20 a sheet. And after we finished it, and that was published in Dwells on the cover, and the company contacted us and they said, can we use these images? And a year later, they're selling them for $100 a sheet as siding material. So, well, anyone else? Yeah.
Thatch house work with the building?
Sorry?
How did the thatch house work with the building?
So that was a good question, and we went through about, were we going to spray fireproof it, and what's the durability of it, and doing some research. It lasts as long as cedar shingles, and it's a great insulation. It's a really primitive building technique, but it's very effective. I have to say the only problem we had was the kids were pulling out all the thatch around the house. They really did. They pulled out some areas. So.